everybody, and welcome back to the show. I am your host, as always, Ben Thomas. One of my absolute favorite things about the world of technology is getting to live and serve a lot of different verticals, everything from healthcare to hospitality to education, and even places like traditional workspaces, right? We've lived for a long time in the world of maybe conferencing and collaboration, but as that technology has evolved, we've been able to drive things like IT excellence, OT excellence, and granular data that really helps drive business outcomes. So I want to live there for our conversation today, and I brought on somebody who really is an expert in the space that can help give some extra context about the conversation, and that's Richard Noel, the Director of Security Operations and Infrastructure over at Eptura. Richard, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you. Thanks very much for having me.
Well, I'll tell you, Richard, it's great to have you on. And typically, I'll set the table with this. Typically, our audience likes to live in the world of installed technology, hardware manufacturers. So we do a really good job as a community of, I would say, speccing, building, installing technology. But we don't always get to have the larger conversations about data management and about drawing meaningful insights and understanding how our technologies and infrastructure best kind of integrate within the workplace as well. And I want to start here. I know that at Eptura, you get to live in a lot of different verticals. It's not unique to the world of specifically workplaces and even security and infrastructure. But you guys just recently did a study that talks sort of about what I would call the modern workplace, right? I'd like to start there because I think it gives us good context for the rest of our conversation. So with that said, Richard, at a high level, what are some of the takeaways and what are some of the conversations and things that we're seeing around the modern workplace specifically today?
Sure. So it's like you alluded to, we've done research in this particular area using the data set from our SaaS products. So Eptura offers SaaS products in 3 different verticals for asset management, visitor management, and then workplace management. We've got, so an enormous amount of information that we can draw on, somewhere upwards of 94 million desk bookings, 25 million room bookings, and a whole comprehensive data set that we've been able to anonymize and then combine with some independent research survey that we conducted with 200 senior professionals across North America, Europe, and Asia Pacific. And we've combined all of that into the workplace survey. And what the workplace survey is telling us is that business leaders are trying to make use of all of the data set that's coming in and have it in a single unified platform to have it make sense. So what business leaders are prioritizing in this space is workplace analytics, collaboration software, and then some AI-driven predictive workspace booking systems that can help improve employee experiences. Some of the important data we've derived from the report, which is probably not entirely surprising, hybrid work is here to stay. The industry is kind of settled at around 3 days per week for employees being at the office. Now, the trend can be a little bit higher in some areas, a little bit less in some areas, depending on if you work at a client-facing area where you're going to have a lot of folks into the office, or if, say, you're in technology where that's a little bit less important. Another important trend that we're seeing since the end of COVID is that the number of visitors that we're welcoming to workspaces is starting to increase. That's been a steady increase over the last little while, and it can encompass a whole different variety of different visitors that we'd have in the workplace, including vendors who may be on site, contractors who may be on site, or even clients coming to visit an office space.
Well, Richard, that's incredible context. And I know we have people probably in the audience right now listening saying, well, hey, this is all great in theory, but how does this actually apply to the conversations normally that I would have with my clients or buyers or whoever? And I think that really the jumping off point is that, hey, we talk about all these different disparate data sources. They're coming from IT, they're coming from OT, they're coming from SaaS platforms and VPN usage and attendance usage. And all of those things sort of boiled together to give you a better picture of not only your workplace, but really how your office is functioning sort of at a whole on a level of efficiency and things like that. But one of the challenges that pops up, right, is we really lean heavily on connectivity, infrastructure, IT technologies, things like that, is that historically, a lot of times there's kind of been some silos between a lot of these folks, right? Whether it be the IT managers and the device management crew, and then the facilities and security, and even the HR. There's sort of been this invisible wall that's been put up, and no longer can we live like that, right? We've got to have everything talk to itself because we've got people out of the office. We've got people on VPN. We've got people that we need to know, hey, when are they coming in? When is the client planning on coming in? And the challenge has been really building all of that information and putting it in a place where not only it can be interpreted, but utilized in a meaningful way. So I want to ask, when you sort of talk about those silos that I mentioned, how have you seen those walls break down? Is it primarily through data, or is it, you have to have cross-discipline expertise as an IT manager now and roll out your security posture? I mean, how have you seen those worlds kind of come together?
It's a really smart question. And so what we've done is a twofold approach that I think kind of addresses both areas, right? The first thing is the siloed data. How do we get value out of all of the siloed data? And I'm going to be mea culpa. I'm an information security guy. I've been working in cybersecurity now for almost a quarter of a decade. I really am that old. And the intention here is to try and see if we can derive cybersecurity value out of all of these disparate data sets that are not generally thought of as valuable to cybersecurity because they surround physical assets, right? It's like you had alluded to. We're talking door badge swipes, camera systems, HVAC systems, all these different types of devices. They're all producing logging that are very similar to what a computer would produce, or a VPN, or any of these other type of connected computer systems where we think of as a more traditional cybersecurity space. Now, to be clear, Eptura doesn't make cybersecurity systems. What we make is software that integrates all of these different operational technologies and facilities management log sources into a single repository for use by our software. But what's interesting is we have an exposed API where you can pull all of that data out and then stick it into a cybersecurity system like a security information event manager, and use that data to either enrich investigations from the cybersecurity space or build out new correlations that could be interesting. So when I was at GSX with my colleague Zach Rowland, we had presented on 3 specific use cases that we thought would be interesting and low-lying and would help people be able to leverage this data. So when you take all of the logging from these OT systems and put them into data lake, right, which is really just a fancy database where all of the data set have been normalized, you can apply machine learning and correlation to start to look at interesting trending in this data. One of the use cases we highlighted was door badge sensor readings to look for thresholds, right? So you can set a threshold on a door that says, all right, on a normal work day, we're seeing 50 badge swipes on this door. And so if we set the threshold at 25 at a low and 100 at a high, then you can set alarming to say, listen, if it crosses any of these thresholds, send an alarm to the cybersecurity folks, and then let's see if there's anything there that needs to be investigated. In our particular case, the alarm fired. We found that all of a sudden a door dropped off the face of the earth. We weren't seeing any swipes on it anymore. And this is where the second interesting playbook comes in, of building a fusion center with your physical security people, where cybersecurity people and physical security people can keep in contact. Now, in our case, it's virtual, right? Obviously, we're a global company. We have offices all over the place. So it's not a physical space. In our case, it's a Teams channel with some practiced playbooks that we use and some open communication channels to ferry this data across. So if we bring that back to our example of the low alarm on the door badge reader, we send a guard out or a physical security person to investigate and see what's going on. In this case, it was employees who were in a sensitive area with some computing equipment, and were moving a lot of new systems in and out of there. And so they were getting tired of badging in, and they had taped the door open. Now, in this case, it was just employees who were trying to make their lives easier, and it wasn't an actual terrible security event, but it could easily have been. And in this case, I think it was a good thing that we were able to detect it before there was any kind of misuse.
Well, Richard, I love that example too, and I think it's a really nice indicator of, you mentioned GSX. You see this same thing happening at shows like GSX, where folks from all sorts of different industries and disciplines find their way to GSX to talk about security. Right? You've got AV installers and integrators and manufacturers. You've got banking and finance. You've got SaaS. You've got all these different people from a lot of different places. Because what's happened is that now these folks in businesses are becoming accountable for things that they may not have been even pre-COVID. Right now, I would say in large part, your larger enterprise companies have done a pretty good job for a long time, having those folks that have been dedicated to a lot of that operational technology and really done a nice job at saying, hey, we need to make sure that these conversations are happening. But one of the places really that I see a lot of opportunity and growth is those small, medium, and even smaller enterprise companies where they say, hey, we've had the same IT guy for 15 years, and he doesn't know anything about cybersecurity outside of, specifically on-prem infrastructure, right? So I want to ask, as you're seeing this world evolve, who is sort of that owner decision maker type? Are you seeing it become more the IT? Is it more the facilities? Are you seeing HR? Who really is owning a lot of these conversations?
It's probably cross-disciplinary. In a lot of organizations, the C-suite will talk amongst themselves and kind of come to these conclusions that there's more convergence that needs to take place. From what we've seen, especially in the workplace survey, a lot of that data comes from business leaders, specifically in OT, and they're the ones I think who are looking for more convergence of OT systems into a singular space where it's more consumable. Where we kind of came in is with the cybersecurity value add of, hey, that data can be further utilized in mind to bring some cybersecurity value from this data set.
Well, what I'm curious of too, even as we're having this conversation, I'm in a building right now where we're in a skyscraper here in Dallas where we very much rent the space, right? We don't have granular control over all of the access control systems, over all the visitor management, right? There's a separate system entirely that our building runs, but we sort of have our own. And I'm curious, we didn't prep this question in advance, so it's okay if we need to pick it. But, I'm curious, do you see sort of a demand, either a demand difference or maybe even a data point difference from folks who maybe are long-term tenants or maybe even own their space versus people like us who rent their space? Is an imbalance there at all?
I wouldn't say there's an imbalance, but there's definitely a demand for more streamlined visitor integration systems to make stuff just a more streamlined experience for the user. And that is a product area that we focus on. And so what we offer are kiosks where you can send email out to a visitor that you're going to invite on site beforehand. The visitor can pre-register. And then when the person arrives on site, it really streamlines that whole access issue because it can authenticate to the person correctly, issue them a badge, and then even to the point of issuing them credentials on your Wi-Fi network that's segmented off to make sure that they can't impact any internal operations. And it can expire out those credentials at the end of the visit to make sure that they can't access any areas that they're not supposed to, or that they're not on a network where they're not supposed to be either. So there's definitely value there.
I agree, and I think really a lot of the challenge right now, and I'll go back to GSX, is that we have to, as an industry, be willing to have base level conversations, right? Because, I mentioned this off air before you and I chatted. I chuckle a little bit when I see a company like Eptura going to GSX because I wouldn't always on face value say, oh, Eptura is a security company, you're a data company, you're a management SaaS company that provides structured outcomes and integrates excellent data. But the reality is that we as businesses and as operators and members of all sorts of different industries in B2B, we have to be willing to have conversations with each other. So I want to ask, if say somebody for the first time is finding themselves having to have these conversations, or you've got an OT technologist and manager operator who says, hey, I now have to have conversations about data management for occupancy and lead certification and ESG requirements. How do those people start the conversation, especially if they wanted to reach out to Eptura?
There are lots of ways to be able to get a hold of us. I think it's all published on our website. Those are pretty easy conversations to broker. And then once in Eptura, the product is scalable and there are 3 different silos that we offer. I think what you're talking about around facilities management is Eptura Workplace, and that will give you all the types of data sets that you want because it handles desk bookings and conference room bookings, and then it can give you some really interesting data around how much utilization are you getting out of your building, right? Is it worth it to have the HVAC on a specific floor on a Friday when no one's going to be there, or on a Monday when no one's going to be there? So it helps streamline efficiency and being able to deploy resources more granularly and in a way that's really data driven.
Richard, I appreciate that context, and I know that our listeners are as well. One thing I always love to do at the end of the show is sort of give you a chance to pull out your crystal ball. Probably 10 years ago, we would have said, hey, the industry is going to be about halfway to where we are now. But obviously things are accelerated through COVID, which I don't think anybody in their right mind actually really would have predicted. But how do you see kind of workplace integrations and data integrations and all these disparate data sources? How do you see that continuing to evolve and inform maybe our next 5-10 years of workplace technology and workflows?
I think it's a really interesting question. If I had a crystal ball and having worked specifically in the cybersecurity space, what we're seeing is a huge acceleration of what's possible with data analytics, with artificial intelligence around machine learning. These algorithms are so incredibly powerful and so incredibly good at looking at different data sets to pick out patterns that people just don't have the aptitude to be able to do. And I think that there's probably a lot of value that we're going to be able to get by integrating artificial intelligence technology into these data sets to be able to glean a lot of patterns that we wouldn't regularly have seen, to make us more efficient and to be able to drive value further.
Well, I know that there may be some employees who are sweating hearing you talk about that, but really at the end of the day, right? It's about driving outcomes, right? And
Yeah,
and the
absolutely.
more that you can be proactive and predictive and say, hey, this is quantifiable, this is not, or hey, this is something that we need to work on as a company. It's always important to have that data and have it structured in a way that is valuable and really can be deployed in meaningful ways. I'll tell you, Richard, we're going to have to find a way to get you back on the show, because I feel like we've really only scratched the surface sort of this conversation. And like I said, the workplace continues to evolve every year, right? You see a new RTO mandate every week, and that means certain things to different kind of groups of employers and things like that. But there are security challenges and there are data challenges that pop up every single time that one of those happens, right? Because you've got all sorts of risks and all sorts of threats that pop up as you continue to bring more folks back into the office. And the inverse is true, right? As you have people that are decentralized. So I promise you we'll find a way to have you back on the show to dig in a little bit deeper. But Richard, I'll tell you, I know there may be some folks saying, hey, I love what Richard's talking about. I'd love to ask him just some more questions. How can people find you and reach out to you?
Yeah, no worries. You can find me on LinkedIn pretty easily. Otherwise, if anyone's got any specific questions, I'm happy to answer. My email address is richard.noel, Noel, at eptura.com. I'm happy to answer any questions any folks may have, or even give them some tips and some pointers on how to start integrating these technologies and build out some interesting use cases to get cybersecurity value from the data.
Well, I'll tell you, Richard, it's been great having you on the show today, and I appreciate your insights on sort of the data management and acquisition side of things. And I'll tell you what, like I said, we do have to get you back on the show, but for now, we'll call it good. Thanks so much for coming on.
No worries. Thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Well, thank you, and thank you all for tuning in as well. Be sure to like and subscribe. Check us out next time on the show.